Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a journey so deep it takes us all the way back to the very first humans. Imagine yourself standing in a world far older than any ancient civilization, where everything around you is wild, untamed, and teeming. With life, you're not just a passive observer of history. Here, you're one of them, the first humans. You've just emerged from the forests of Africa, your face weathered by the elements, your senses heightened by a world that's only beginning to reveal its secrets. You probably won't survive this, at least not without some serious ingenuity and luck. You see, it's not just about outsmarting nature's beasts. The world back then didn't have the luxury of grocery stores running water, or even decent footwear. It's a harsh existence, but also one of unparalleled opportunity, as the first Homo sapiens learned to thrive against the odds. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. It's always fun to know how far we've traveled together now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's difficult to imagine what life was really like for the very first humans, those early Homo sapiens that roamed the earth tens of thousands of years ago. But imagine this: the world you're in is full of wild, untamed nature, with predators lurking in every shadow and the sky sometimes looking like an impenetrable mess of stars. You're just one small, fragile creature in a vast and unforgiving world, but also one capable of things that no other species can. You're upright, with a clever mind and a very sharp tool in your hand, a tool you probably didn't even know you could create. You're just beginning to evolve. The earliest known Homo sapiens appeared in Africa around 300,000 years ago. These early humans are often depicted in movies with primitive grunts and dirty rags, but in reality, they were much more complex and capable than we might think. Like Homo habilis and Homo erectus, but Homo sapiens were the ones who made it. They're the ones who ultimately took control of the world and spread across the globe, leaving a trail of influence that we still feel today. Now picture it: the African landscape stretches before you, vast open savannas filled with the sound of distant animals calling to each other, the breeze thick with the scent of earth and grass. Your group huddles around a small fire, the crackling flames offering the only warmth and protection from the night's chill. This fire, this simple primal tool, will be one of your most significant allies in the world. It keeps predators away and provides light in the darkness. Historians still argue over exactly what sparked the evolution of Homo sapiens. But there's no doubt that our ancestors had a knack for adapting to their surroundings. They were clever, resourceful, and above all, they had an innate drive to survive. They were hunter-gatherers, meaning their survival depended on their ability to track animals, harvest plants, and learn to navigate through the changing seasons and climates. But it wasn't just their ability to adapt to the environment that set them apart. It was their capacity for creating tools and technologies that helped them bend nature to their will. And that's where we start our journey, with the very first tools. The first tools you might be thinking of are something like primitive hammers or spears, right? But, believe it or not, the very first tools were far simpler and far more elegant than that. They were small, sharp stones, known as old Dowan tools, and they were the original Swiss Army knife of the prehistoric world. Think of a stone you might pick up by a river, smooth but jagged at the edges like nature's own sculpting project. It's the kind of tool that, in the hands of the right person, can cut, scrape, and pound anything from meat to wood to bone. This wasn't some accident of nature either. Early humans intentionally shaped these stones to give themselves a massive survival advantage. You could say that making tools was our species' first big leap into becoming masters of the environment rather than just part of it. Historians still debate whether Homo habilis or Homo erectus were the first to really start making these tools, but no one can deny that it changed everything. It was the beginning of a new era where we weren't just scavenging for food. We were starting to shape the world around us. Now imagine yourself sitting by a fire on a chilly evening as your ancestors worked on perfecting their tools under the flickering light. A sharp stone is held carefully in the hand, its edges chipped and honed to perfection. There's a sense of accomplishment in each piece carved, as if you're on the verge of discovering something greater than the mere necessity of survival. The first tools gave these early humans something that no animal could replicate: control over their surroundings. But as sophisticated as these tools were, they weren't perfect. These early creations were made from rocks and bones, meaning they had limitations, not to mention they were fragile, and when one broke, you had to start over. It wasn't until later, when humans learned to use other materials, like wood and bone, that tools became even more versatile. Some tools were meant for cutting, others for hunting or even defense, but no matter the purpose, the crafting of them symbolized something fundamental about early humanity: the realization that you could take a natural object and transform it into something more than it was meant to be. That was the dawn of technology, this shift from the world's raw materials to something created, something designed, is one of the reasons we ended up ruling the planet, while other species were content to just live within their environment. Homo sapiens were beginning to bend nature to their will. They were problem solvers. They saw challenges not as roadblocks, but as puzzles to be solved by using the right tools in the right way. And let's not forget one of the most important tools of all. Fire was already in use long before Homo sapiens appeared, but it was our species that learned to control it and make it an everyday part of life. It wasn't just something to warm you or ward off predators. It was a tool that allowed you to cook your food, heat your home, and in some cases, even craft tools from metal. It was a gift of the earth, yes, but one that had to be tamed and mastered. That fire, that simple flame, would come to be a lifeline, a beacon in the wilderness. But to get there, early humans had to endure a long journey filled with failure, trial, and, eventually, success. No one knows exactly how long it took for early humans to perfect fire-making, but historians estimate it took hundreds of thousands of years before we figured out how to reliably start a fire without waiting for lightning to strike. But fire was just the beginning. The development of tools wasn't the only milestone in our evolution. We also had to learn how to communicate and collaborate, which brings us to one of the most important changes that occurred around this time: the birth of language. Language, the very thing that sets us apart from all other species on Earth, was beginning to take shape. Now, you might think language just appeared overnight, like a flash of inspiration. But, in reality, it was a slow, gradual process, evolving over thousands of years. There are sounds, grunts, gestures, and perhaps a few simple utterances that begin to form ideas. At first, it's all about survival and how the first fully formed language emerged. Some believe it came about as early as 2 million years ago with Homo erectus, who began to use more complex sounds to communicate. Others argue that it was Homo sapiens who perfected language, with its first true words and syntax appearing around 100,000 years ago. No matter the specifics, what we know for certain is that language became essential to the survival and success of early humans. It was more than just a tool, it was a way to connect with others, share knowledge, and solve problems together. Now, picture yourself in one of the first human groups. It's not a small tribe of a few people, but rather a growing community. There's a sense of shared understanding that transcends mere survival. You may not be speaking in full sentences as we do today, but those early sounds would eventually evolve into words, phrases, and stories that tie you together. It's a collective effort, a way to bond with others, share your experience of the world, and pass down knowledge. Civilizations and all human achievements are built. But language wasn't just about survival. It opened doors to creativity and social bonding. Imagine how much richer the world became when early humans could communicate about things beyond immediate needs. They could share dreams, ask questions, and begin to form the rudimentary concepts of culture. The first myths, the first tales of gods and monsters would emerge from these conversations. And as these stories spread from one generation to the next, they formed the roots of what we now recognize as human culture, along with language. Early humans also began to organize themselves into social groups, tribes, bands, and eventually clans. These communities weren't just about survival. A role, whether it was to gather food, protect the group, or care for the young. You needed the help of others to survive, but you also relied on each other to create meaning in a harsh world. Historians argue whether these early groups were peaceful or whether they were constantly at war with one another, fighting for territory or resources. What we do know is that human beings learned to cooperate at a level never before seen in the animal kingdom. This cooperation wasn't just about surviving, was about thriving, about creating something greater than the sum of its parts. It was the beginning of culture, the birth of society. But not all early humans lived in such close-knit groups. Some, like the Neanderthals, lived in smaller, more isolated bands. These Neanderthals were contemporaries of Homo sapiens, but they were very different in their way of life. They had their own tools, their own methods of hunting, and their own social structures. However, their story didn't end well. Over time, they disappeared, likely due to competition with Homo sapiens, changes in climate, or perhaps even an inability to adapt to the rapidly changing environment. The question of why they vanished remains a subject of debate among scientists. But one thing is clear: they were part of a greater narrative, one that saw the rise of Homo sapiens as the dominant species on Earth. As Homo sapiens began to spread across the planet, they encountered new environments, new challenges, and new opportunities. From the plains of Africa to the frozen tundras of Europe, early humans were forced to adapt in ways that we are only beginning to understand. They became masters of survival, constantly learning, evolving, and pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Their tools, language, and social structures evolved alongside their ability to conquer new territories. But despite all these advancements, one key element remained constant: the need for food, warmth. Shelter, the simple act of creating a safe space for yourself, something we often take for granted today. But for the first humans, it was a matter of life or death. Imagine a world without the luxury of sturdy houses or even tents. Your shelter could be as basic as a cave, a rock overhang, or perhaps a rudimentary structure made of branches and animal skins. These early shelters weren't designed for comfort, but for survival. They were a shield against the elements, the predators, and the unpredictable nature of the world around you. The first shelters were likely temporary, thrown together in haste whenever a group needed to rest or escape the dangers of the wild. But over time, these shelters began to evolve. Early humans learned to use the natural materials around them: wood, stone, bone, and even animal pelt, to create more lasting structures. Think of the first huts, simple, low to the ground, with a thatched roof made from grass or leaves. These early shelters were surprisingly effective, providing warmth in the winter and shade in the summer. Some groups even created shelters that were partially underground to keep warm during harsh climates. Historians argue whether early humans intentionally sought out caves to live in, or whether they simply stumbled upon them. It's possible that caves provided the earliest humans with the perfect blend of shelter and security. These natural formations offered protection from predators and harsh weather, as well as a sense of permanence that temporary structures couldn't provide. But living in caves wasn't without its challenges. While caves were an excellent natural shelter, they could also be home to dangerous animals like cave bears or wild cats. And depending on the location, caves could be damp or cold, making life inside a bit less ideal than it might seem. However, caves offered more than just a place to sleep. They became centers of early human activity. Some caves, like those in Lascaux, France, are famous for their elaborate cave paintings, offering us a glimpse into the lives of our early ancestors. These paintings aren't just pretty pictures, they're evidence of a deeper, symbolic understanding of the world. Early humans weren't just surviving in these caves. They were expressing themselves, telling stories, and perhaps even practicing rituals. This use of cave art suggests that shelter was more than just a physical need. It was a space for cultural expression, for identity, and for the development of the human mind. As human groups continued to grow and develop, the idea of shelter began to expand. No longer confined to caves or simple lean-tos, humans started constructing more sophisticated dwellings. They learned to build permanent structures, utilizing stone, wood, and other materials to create homes that would last for generations. Some early humans built houses with circular walls made from mud and brick, while others constructed more advanced homes with thatched roofs or stone foundations. These advancements in shelter weren't just about protection, they were also about comfort and stability. Early humans were beginning to realize that a safe, comfortable living space was key to thriving, not just surviving. Yet, even with these advancements, shelter was still a luxury for many early humans. While some groups were able to settle into permanent homes, others continued to live a more nomadic existence, constantly on the move, in search of food and better shelter. This nomadic lifestyle was essential for survival in certain environments, such as the steppes of Asia or the tundra of Europe. where resources were scarce, and the need to follow migratory animals was critical. As Homo sapiens spread across the globe, their approach to shelter became even more diverse. From the frozen caves of Siberia to the dry deserts of Africa, early humans adapted their shelters to the specific challenges of each environment. They learned to create dwellings that could withstand extreme temperatures, torrential rains, and even earthquakes. This ability to adapt shelter to the environment became a hallmark of Homo sapiens, and was one of the key reasons they were able to outlast other species, like the Neanderthals, who did not adapt as quickly to changing conditions. But shelter was just one part of the equation. Along with shelter, early humans had another essential need to meet: food. And not just any food, but food that would sustain them through the harshest of climates, across great distances, and for generations to come. In the next chapter of our journey, we'll take a closer look at the diet of early humans, what they ate, how they hunted, and how they gathered their sustenance. So, grab your makeshift spear, and let's head out to explore the first meals of humankind. Food, the essential fuel for survival. For the first humans, securing a meal wasn't just a daily task, it was a matter of life and death. Unlike today, when we can simply walk to the kitchen and open a fridge, early humans had to rely on their wits, their tools, and their ability to work together to gather enough food to survive. And what they ate, well, it was a far cry from the diverse diets we enjoy today. In the beginning, early humans were primarily hunter-gatherers, relying on wild plants, fruits, nuts, and animals for sustenance. Imagine yourself in the thick of it's canning the savanna, the forests, or the riverbanks for something edible. You and your group are constantly on the move, hunting for game and foraging for anything you can find that will provide nourishment. The world around you is full of dangers, wild animals, harsh climates, and the threat of starvation. But at the same time, it's full of potential fruits hanging from trees, herds of animals grazing in the distance, and streams full of fish. The challenge is in knowing which plants are safe to eat, which animals are worth chasing, and which hunting techniques will yield the best results. Historians still argue about exactly what early humans ate, but we know that their diet was varied and depended on their environment. In Africa, early Homo sapiens may have relied heavily on fruits, tubers, and leaves, supplemented by hunting small animals like antelopes. As humans began to spread to other parts of the world, their diet adapted accordingly. In colder climates, like Europe and Asia, early humans likely consumed more animal-based foods, including large mammals such as mammoths, bison, and deer. In some cases, they even ate fish and shellfish, taking advantage of any food source that was available. But here's the kicker. Early humans weren't just hunting and gathering any food that crossed their path. They were also starting to develop sophisticated techniques for finding, preparing, and preserving food. For example, the use of fire allowed them to cook their meals, making food more digestible and providing extra calories. Cooking also made food safer by killing harmful bacteria and parasites, which, let's be honest, would have been a huge deal in a world without refrigeration. In addition to cooking, early humans were also learning how to store food for the future. They would dry or smoke meat to preserve it for times when food was scarce. They learned how to identify edible plants and even started to experiment with the domestication of animals and plants. This shift from a purely wild diet to one that included cultivated food marked the beginning of what we now recognize as agriculture. But that's a topic for another time. The focus here is on the primal, survivalist diet of early humans before they settled into agricultural life. One of the most fascinating aspects of early human diets was their ability to adapt to various environments. Think about the first humans who crossed the land bridge into the Americas. They had to adapt to new and unfamiliar climates, forests, deserts, and frozen tundras, and figure out how to find food in each new location. In these harsh conditions, food wasn't always abundant, and humans had to develop strategies to survive. They hunted in groups, using coordination and cleverness to trap or kill their prey. They used tools and weapons to help them capture larger animals that would provide meat for weeks or even months. And then there's the interesting fact that humans were likely much more resourceful when it came to food than we might imagine. Some evidence suggests that early humans weren't just scavenging the land for whatever they could find. They were intentionally seeking out specific foods for their health benefits. For instance, early humans may have gathered medicinal plants to treat illnesses or injuries. It's quite possible that they recognized the healing power of certain herbs long before we began formalizing medicine. Historians still argue whether early humans had a deep understanding of the medicinal properties of plants, or whether it was more of a trial-and-error approach. Either way, it's clear that the connection between food and health has been around for a long time now. While the diet of early humans was varied and often unpredictable, it was also intensely social. Food wasn't just about nourishment, it was a communal activity. Groups of early humans would gather together to hunt, share their finds, and work together to survive. It was during these shared meals that bonds were formed, stories were told, and language was further developed. Eating wasn't just about feeding the body, it was about connecting with others and strengthening the group. As humans evolved and spread across the globe, their diets continued to evolve too. The transition from foraging and hunting to agriculture didn't happen overnight. It took thousands of years for humans to figure out how to cultivate plants, domesticate animals, and create stable food sources. This shift would eventually lead to the rise of cities, trade, and the complex societies we know today. But in these early days, food was the foundation of life, the very thing that allowed early humans to thrive in a world that was constantly shifting and changing. And so, as we turn our attention from food to the next phase of human development, let's pause for a moment. Imagine yourself sitting by the fire after a long day of hunting and gathering, the satisfaction of a full belly settling in. Your body is tired but content. You've made it through another day. But you're not just surviving anymore, you're thriving. You're part of a growing community, a group of people who share not only meals, but also dreams, stories, and the will to continue evolving. And that's where we go next, into the realm of the first burial rituals, where humans began to show respect for the dead, signaling the dawn of spirituality and culture. Death, it's one of the most universal experiences, and for early humans, it wasn't just an inevitable part of life. It was a profound event that began to shape the very essence of their existence. Imagine standing beside a fire, the embers crackling in the darkness, and you're looking down at the body of a loved one. Their time has come, and what you do next will mark a significant shift in your understanding of the world. This isn't just a time for mourning. It's the moment when you begin to perform the first rituals for the dead. And with those rituals, the birth of spirituality begins. The first burial rituals are among the earliest signs of complex thinking in humans. Historians have found evidence that our ancestors didn't just leave bodies to the elements or discard them without thought. Instead, they began to show respect for the deceased, treating death not as an end, but as part of something larger. This is where the concept of spirituality begins to creep into human life. Early humans, especially those of the Neanderthal and early Homo sapiens groups, are known to have intentionally buried their dead, sometimes with offerings like tools, animal bones, and food. These acts suggest that the people who lived during this time didn't just see death as a natural occurrence, they saw it as a transition, perhaps even into another realm. Historians still argue about the exact nature of these early burial rituals. Were they purely practical, simply a way to remove the body to prevent disease, or were they deeply spiritual acts meant to honor the deceased and ensure their journey into the afterlife? We may never know the true motivations behind these early rituals, but one thing is clear: they represented a major shift in human thinking. Burial rituals were a way for early humans to express grief, to remember those who had passed, and to mark the transition from life to death. This marks the very beginning of what we would eventually call religion, philosophy, and the search for meaning in the unknown. In some cases, early humans didn't just bury their dead, they buried them with great care. The remains of Neanderthals in Europe, for example, have been found in shallow graves, sometimes accompanied by flowers or animal remains. There's even evidence that some early human groups placed the bodies of their dead in fetal positions, as if they were preparing them for a journey or rebirth. This kind of burial practice suggests a belief in some form of existence beyond death, though it's unclear whether that belief was widespread among all early humans or confined to specific groups. As Homo sapiens began to spread across the globe, their burial practices became even more varied. In Africa, some early humans buried their dead in caves, while in the colder climates of Europe, the bodies of the dead were often buried beneath piles of stone. These early burial sites weren't just places of remembrance, they were the first physical expressions of human culture. They became sacred spaces, places where the living could connect with the deceased, and where the dead could be honored for their role in life. The evidence of early burial practices doesn't just tell us about death, it also tells us about life. It tells us that early humans had the ability to think beyond their immediate physical needs. They could look at the world and wonder what lay beyond it. They had the capacity for introspection, for understanding that death was part of a larger cycle. And this understanding of death as something sacred laid the foundation for the spiritual and cultural beliefs that would evolve over the millennia. This respect for the dead and the rituals surrounding death weren't just about the deceased, they were also about the living. By performing these rituals, early humans reinforced the bonds between one another. They were a way to bring the group together in a time of loss, to unite in their shared humanity and their shared experiences. These rituals also served a practical purpose. They allowed early humans to create lasting memories of those who had passed, ensuring that their legacy would live on in the minds of others. In the centuries that followed, burial rituals would evolve and become more elaborate. But the first burials, the ones done with care and thought, were the beginnings of something much larger. They marked the start of human spirituality, the search for meaning, and the deep desire to understand the mysteries of life and death. But it wasn't just the dead that early humans thought about. It was also the living, and especially their families. So next, we'll take a look at the early human family units, the relationships that tied these early humans together, and how the foundation for social structures and reproduction began to form.
The family, the very core of early human life. It's easy to imagine early humans as solitary beings, each person isolated in their struggle for survival. But the truth is far different. The first humans didn't live alone in the wilderness. They lived in groups, bonded by kinship, shared responsibilities, and the need for cooperation. These groups, these early families, were essential to survival in a world where danger lurked at every corner. The bonds they formed weren't just about protection. They were the foundation for a social structure that would last through the ages. Imagine yourself in one of these early family units, sitting together around the fire. You're not alone. You have others by your side, perhaps parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, and cousins. In early human societies, the family was everything. It was through family that knowledge was passed down, tasks were divided, and survival was ensured. Each person had a role, and each role was important. Whether it was gathering food, protecting the group, or caring for the young, every member of the family contributed to the well-being of the whole. Historians still argue about the exact structure of early human families. Were they nuclear families, similar to what we think of today, with a mother, father, and children? Or were they more communal, with extended families living together in close-knit groups? The evidence suggests that early humans, especially those of Homo sapiens, lived in small bands or tribes, where family ties were central to social organization. These bands were often made up of several related families who worked together to hunt, gather food, and defend themselves from predators. While the family unit itself was small, it was part of a larger social network that extended beyond just immediate kin. The importance of family relationships is seen not only in the way early humans lived, but also in how they reproduced early. Humans had a similar reproductive strategy to other primates. The care and nurturing of offspring were crucial to survival, and this meant that mothers played a central role in raising children. But unlike other animals, early humans had a much longer period of dependence for their young. A baby Homo sapiens required years of care and protection before they could become self-sufficient. This prolonged dependency would have placed an enormous strain on early human families. But it also created strong family bonds. In the early days, parenting was a shared effort. Both mothers and fathers contributed to the care of children. Fathers likely played an active role in providing food and protection, while mothers focused on nurturing and educating the young. But it wasn't just about the immediate family. The extended family, grandparent, aunts, uncles would also have played a role in raising children, helping to teach them the skills they would need to survive and thrive in the world. What's even more fascinating is how early humans passed down knowledge and culture. The family wasn't just a place of reproduction. It was also a place where traditions, skills, and stories were passed from one generation to the next. Whether it was how to make tools, where to hunt, or the importance of certain rituals, the family was the first institution for education. Stories, much like the ones we still tell today, were probably shared around the fire. teaching the young ones about the world they lived in. These stories helped shape the cultural identity of early humans, providing not just practical knowledge, but also meaning and purpose. As the family unit evolved, so did the role of women. While the gender roles in early human societies weren't as rigid as we might expect, women, particularly mothers, were central to the family structure. Early humans lived in a world where survival depended on cooperation, and women played an essential role in this. They gathered food, cared for children, and, in some cases, participated in hunting. The idea that women were passive or sidelined in early human societies is a misconception. Evidence suggests that women had a vital role in the survival and success of their groups. Historians still debate the social structures of early human families, particularly regarding gender roles and the division of labor. Some argue that early human societies were relatively egalitarian, with women and men sharing responsibilities more equally than we often assume. Others suggest that there were divisions of labor based on gender, with women primarily focused on gathering and men on hunting. Regardless of the specifics, one thing is clear: family was the glue that held early human societies together. It was through these family structures that early humans learned how to work together, how to survive, and how to thrive in a world full of danger and uncertainty. But family life wasn't just about practical survival. The emotional bonds formed within early human families were also crucial. The close-knit nature of these early groups meant that emotional connections, like love and affection, played an essential role in creating the stability needed to raise children and ensure the survival of the group. The warmth and support provided by these family units were essential for early human development, allowing for the nurturing of the next generation and the continuation of the species. As Homo sapiens spread across the globe, the family structure remained a constant, though it adapted to different environments. Whether in the frozen tundras of Europe, the dense forests of Asia, or the savannas of Africa, early humans formed families that were not only vital for survival, but also for the growth of social and cultural identities. And it's from these small, intimate family units that larger social structures would eventually emerge: tribes, villages, and cities, each built upon the same foundations of cooperation, shared responsibility, and emotional connection. As we move forward in our journey, we'll take a look at the next step in human evolution: the development of tools of warfare. How did early humans defend themselves and secure their place in the world? And how did the concept of conflict begin to emerge in these early societies?
Warfare, it seems like such a far cry from the peaceful family units we've just explored. But as early humans adapted to their environments and began to form larger social groups, the need to protect what they had, territory, food sources, and even their very survival, became an undeniable part of their existence. Warfare, in its earliest form, wasn't the grand battles we envision today. It wasn't about armies clashing with weapons of mass destruction. Rather, it was about small-scale conflicts, territorial disputes, and the defense of one's group from other groups, both human and animal. You might picture the early human conflicts as primitive skirmishes, where the primary goal was simply to fend off predators or rival groups. Early humans didn't have sophisticated weapons or battle strategies. Instead, they used the tools they had at hand: stone, axes, spears, and other rudimentary weapons. These were designed not just for hunting, but for defense as well. Historians argue whether early humans engaged in constant warfare or whether violence was more sporadic, driven by necessity or scarce resources. What we do know is that early humans were not entirely peaceful creatures. Conflict was a part of their survival strategy. In the beginning, humans relied on their numbers and their ability to work together to defend themselves. Early human groups, especially those in Africa, would often hunt in packs, using coordinated efforts to bring down large prey like antelope or bison. This teamwork, this ability to strategize as a group, was crucial for survival. As time went on, early humans began to apply this same level of cooperation to defending their territory and their families. Cooperation in times of war meant the difference between life and death. The first weapons of war were far from sophisticated. Early humans would have used stone-tipped spears, which, though simple, were highly effective for hunting and for defense. These spears were designed to pierce through the thick hide of large animals, but they could also be used against humans in battle. The idea of using a pointed object to attack or defend is, of course, ancient and essential to the development of warfare. What early humans lacked in advanced weaponry, they made up for in creativity and the will to survive. Some evidence suggests that Homo sapiens were also the first to use projectile weapons, like throwing spears or rocks, to increase their range and strike at enemies from a distance. Historians still debate when the first true wars occurred among human groups. It's possible that these early conflicts were limited to smaller, local skirmishes over territory or food resources. But over time, as human groups became larger and more organized, the scale of these conflicts began to grow. And as the stakes of survival increased, early humans began to develop more advanced strategies and weapons for warfare. But what was it that motivated early humans to fight? Was it purely about survival? Or was there something deeper, something rooted in the very fabric of early human nature that drove humans to conflict? Some scholars suggest that early humans engaged in warfare not just for resources, but for social reasons. As human groups became larger and more complex, competition for status, leadership, and power could have fueled conflicts. Power struggles, though difficult to trace in prehistory, are likely as old as humanity itself. By the time Homo sapiens began to spread across the globe, conflicts between groups may have become more common, especially as human populations grew and more territory was needed to sustain these groups. The nature of early human warfare wasn't just physical. It also involved strategic thinking, cooperation, and communication. The same skills that early humans used to work together in hunting and gathering would have been employed in warfare. Early humans learned to use their environment to their advantage, whether it was using the terrain to hide or ambush a rival group, or setting traps to capture an enemy. Warfare was not just about brute strength. It was about using intelligence and strategy to outwit the enemy. One of the most interesting developments in early human warfare was the idea of defense. As human groups settled into more permanent locations, they began to construct rudimentary fortifications. These could be simple walls made of wood or stone, or even trenches to keep enemies out. The concept of defending a home or a territory against invaders marked a shift in the way early humans viewed conflict. No longer was warfare just about fighting over resources. It was about protecting what had been built. Early humans had created not only a physical home, but a sense of identity that they were willing to fight to preserve. As early humans expanded their territories, the nature of warfare began to change. What started as small-scale, individual conflicts between families or tribes gradually gave way to larger, more organized battles. These larger conflicts required coordination, leadership, and specialized roles within a group. The idea of a warrior-class individuals who were specifically trained to fight began to take shape. While these warriors were still part of a larger social structure, their role as protectors of the group marked a key turning point in the evolution of human conflict. The earliest forms of human warfare were brutal, but they also marked the beginning of something greater. They laid the foundation for more organized societies, where the need for defense and territorial control would eventually lead to the rise of kingdoms, empires, and civilizations. As early humans mastered the art of survival, they also learned the importance of protecting what they had built. And that's where the story of humanity begins to take a more recognizable shape. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The world of early humans was still largely untamed, and many of the great empires we associate with civilization were still a long way off. For now, we leave the battlefields behind and move into the next chapter of human history, the birth of cities. How did early humans transition from small bands and tribes to larger, more complex societies? How did they begin to form the foundations for civilization itself? Let's explore the dawn of the city-state. Cities where everything we associate with modern civilization began to take root. Before humans began building cities, we lived in small, mobile groups, always on the move in search of food, shelter, and safety. But as time passed, a few groups started to settle in one place, creating small villages and later, larger communities. These early settlements laid the groundwork for the cities that would become the epicenters of culture, politics, and technology. Imagine stepping into one of these early cities, maybe in Mesopotamia, along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The first thing you notice is the noise, people calling out to one another, and the steady hum of trade happening in the marketplace. The air is thick with the scent of cooking fires, animal dung, and freshly baked bread. It's not a perfect place. There are muddy streets, cramped homes, and probably a few stray dogs scavenging for scraps. But there's also a sense of excitement, of potential. The people in this city have left behind the life of a nomadic hunter-gatherer and embraced something new, a permanent home. Historians still debate when exactly cities first emerged, but the consensus points to ancient Mesopotamia around 5,000 years ago, specifically in the area known as Sumer. The Sumerians are often credited with creating the first true cities, with Ur and Uruk being among the most well-known. These early cities were built around river systems, which provided fertile soil for agriculture, a reliable water source, and a way to transport goods. The rivers were essential to the development of these cities because they allowed humans to engage in agriculture on a larger scale. As early humans began to domesticate plants and animals, they were able to produce more food than ever before. This surplus allowed communities to grow. It also freed up some members of society from the need to hunt and gather, allowing them to specialize in other tasks, like pottery making, metalworking, or, most importantly, administration. For the first time, people could focus on tasks that went beyond immediate survival. In short, they could start thinking about the future, organizing society, and creating systems for governance and trade. But while agriculture provided the foundation for cities, it was the development of new technologies that really allowed early cities to thrive. Early humans, now living in one place. One of the most significant developments was the creation of writing. The Sumerians, around 3000 BCE, are credited with developing cuneiform writing, which started as a system of pictographs and eventually evolved into a more complex script. Writing allowed humans to record information, manage trade, document laws, and even write stories and myths. This was a game changer in human history, and it marked the beginning of recorded history. Alongside writing came the need for governance. The first cities required systems to manage resources, maintain order, and settle disputes. Early forms of government emerged as a result, with leaders who were often seen as divine or semi-divine figures. In ancient Sumer, kings were thought to be chosen by the gods to rule, and their authority was often unquestioned. These early leaders weren't just political figures, they were also religious ones, tasked with maintaining the favor of the gods to ensure prosperity for their people. Religion and politics were intertwined, elite and the common people. At the top, you had the priests, the kings, and the merchants who controlled trade and resources. Below them were the farmers, craftsmen, and laborers who made the city function on a day-to-day basis. The lowest tier consisted of slaves or indentured servants who worked the land and built the infrastructure of the city. These social divisions were crucial in the development of early cities, as they allowed for specialization and the division of labor, which in turn made these societies more efficient. Cities, however, weren't just about organization and labor. They were also cultural. Hubs, the first cities, became centers of art, literature, and architecture. The Sumerians, for instance, are known for their ziggurats, large stepped pyramids that served as temples to the gods. These massive structures were not only architectural feats, but also symbols of religious devotion and political power. As cities grew, so did the opportunities for cultural expression. Artists, musicians, and writers were able to create works that captured the essence of their society, laying the foundation for the rich cultural traditions that would follow. But cities weren't just peaceful centers of progress. They were also sites of conflict, with larger populations and more resources at stake. Competition between cities grew. Some cities fought for control over water sources or fertile land, while others sought to expand their influence through military conquest. This territoriality was one of the driving forces behind the rise of empires, as city-states grew into larger, more complex political entities. As cities grew, so did human impact on the land, and the natural landscape was transformed to meet the needs of urban populations. The shift from a nomadic existence to settled life created new challenges, particularly in terms of resource management and environmental sustainability. These challenges would continue to grow as cities expanded, setting the stage for many of the issues we face today in terms of urbanization, pollution, and climate change. As we leave the bustling city streets behind, we begin to realize that the rise of cities didn't just mark a new chapter in human history, set the stage for the world we live in today. From the first scribbled records to the complex networks of trade and governance, cities were the birthplace of the modern world. But they were also the start of something much older, a struggle for resources, one that would take us into the development of empires and the rise of human civilization. In the next chapter, we'll explore how early humans' interactions with the environment, combined with their newfound social structures, laid the groundwork for the great civilizations of the ancient world. The rise of empires. This is where we begin to see the first true power structures in human history. Once the foundations of early cities were established, it wasn't long before these settlements began to consolidate their power and expand. It was the natural progression of human development. Once we had learned how to live together, create culture, and build cities, the next step was to conquer and control even greater territories. And so, the first empires began to take shape, driven by the need to protect and extend their influence over more resources, land, and people. Imagine yourself standing on the vast plains of Mesopotamia, watching as a mighty army marches toward your city. The sound of hundreds of feet pounding the earth reverberates through the air, and the smell of dust and sweat mixes with the heavy anticipation of battle. These are the armies of the first empires, Sumer, Akkad, Babylonian, that were small compared to what we would recognize today, but huge in their scope and influence. What began as small city-states, each trying to assert its dominance, soon grew into larger empires, claiming territories and people far beyond their original borders. The rise of these empires marked the beginning of organized conflict and diplomacy. On an unprecedented scale, historians still debate the exact criteria for what makes an empire. But one thing is certain. Empires were about more than just military conquest. They were about building and maintaining power over vast regions. They created systems of law, tax, trade, and governance that were essential for managing large populations. The Sumerians, for example, developed one of the earliest known forms of written law as the Code of Urnamum, making it clear that laws were necessary not just for city governance, but for controlling larger populations. The idea of law, of fairness, and of justice became central to these growing empires. And it wasn't just the rulers who were interested in maintaining order. Laws were essential for keeping societies functioning smoothly, whether they governed trade, family relationships, or disputes over land and resources. While military conquest was certainly a hallmark of early empires, so was the concept of infrastructure. One of the reasons empires were able to grow and expand was because they understood the importance of maintaining and improving infrastructure. Roads, bridges, and canals allowed goods and armies to move efficiently across the empire. In the case of the Roman Empire, for example, the famous Roman roads allowed their armies to travel vast distances, maintaining control over the empire's territories. Early empires were sophisticated in their ability to plan, manage resources, and maintain infrastructure. Another important factor in the rise of empires was the expansion of trade networks. As empires grew, so did their access to resources, both from within and beyond their borders. Trade routes expanded, linking distant regions and civilizations, spreading ideas, cultures, and technologies. The Silk Roads, which would later become famous for linking East and West, were already in the making during these early empires. The Akkadian Empire, for example, established trade networks that extended from Mesopotamia all the way to the Indus Valley, allowing goods like textiles, metals, and luxury items to flow between regions. But even with the vast resources and impressive systems of governance, these early empires weren't invincible. The rise of empires also meant the rise of rebellion. Conquering territory and maintaining control over such a vast area was difficult. Empires faced internal strife, uprisings, and external pressures from rival empires. This constant struggle for power, resources, and control led to the eventual fall of many early empires. The Akkadian Empire, one of the first true empires in human history, fell after only a few hundred years. Despite their powerful armies and advanced governance, the Akkadians couldn't sustain their empire in the face of internal conflict and invasion from neighboring peoples. But even as empires fell, the idea of empire continued to evolve. What the early empires of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley created was the model for future empires. These empires established trade routes, spread culture, and pioneered the systems of governance and infrastructure that would become hallmarks of later civilizations. One of the most significant early empires was Egypt. The pharaohs were not just rulers, they were considered divine god-kings who had been chosen to rule by the gods themselves. The ancient Egyptians built one of the most enduring empires in history, lasting for over 3,000 years. The building of the pyramids is perhaps the most iconic symbol of Egypt's imperial might, reflecting both their technological prowess and their belief in the divine connection between their rulers and the gods. The rise of empires also brought with it the rise of warfare on a larger scale. As powerful kingdoms expanded, they clashed with one another over resources, territory, and dominance. The militarization of these societies became a key component of empire building. The Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, Egyptians, and later, the Persians, Greeks, and Romans all used warfare as a tool of expansion and consolidation. Empires became increasingly dependent on military strength, and their societies began to reflect the military nature of their rulers. However, the rise of empires also led to the spread of knowledge. The conquest of territories often resulted in the exchange of ideas, technologies, and cultural practices. The spread of the alphabet, writing systems, and artistic techniques helped unite diverse cultures within an empire. The ancient world, for all its wars and conquests, was also a world of connection, where new ideas and innovations could spread far and wide. It was through these connections that the foundations of modern science, art, and philosophy began to form. As we look at these early empires, we realize that they were not just about power and control, they were also about legacy. The legacies of these early empires have had lasting impacts on the world we live in today. From the laws that still form the basis of many legal systems to the architectural wonders that continue to inspire awe, the first empires were the crucible in which much of modern civilization was forged. But, of course, the rise of empires wasn't the end of the story. The fall of one empire often set the stage for the rise of another. The empires of the ancient world were constantly shifting, growing and falling apart, giving way to new powers and new ideas. The story of empires is one of cycles, rise, fall, and rebirth, each one leaving behind a bit of its legacy for future generations to build upon. As we move into the next chapter, we'll begin to explore the incredible achievements of these early civilizations, the arts, science, and philosophy that began to shape the future of human history. From the earliest days of empire building to the first discoveries in mathematics and astronomy. We'll uncover how these early societies laid the groundwork for the world we live in today. As the first empires took shape and the foundations of civilization were laid, human beings began to shift their focus from mere survival to mastery of the world around them. In the midst of wars, conquests, and power struggles, some incredible achievements were unfolding, achievements that would shape the future of human history for millennia to come. It was in the rise of these early civilizations that we see the first flickers of art, science, philosophy, and architecture that would define our world. Imagine stepping into the ancient city of Babylon, one of the most sophisticated cities of the ancient world. You're walking down streets lined with towering ziggurats and beautifully decorated palaces. The scent of incense fills the air as people bustle about, selling goods in the market and debating the latest philosophical ideas. You can hear the sound of water from the great Ishtar Gate, and above, the stars twinkle as if they, too, are witnessing the rise of human creativity. This was not just a city of stone and wood, it was a city of ideas, a place where knowledge and beauty were being created on a scale never before seen. Historians often mark the beginning of recorded human history with the development of writing. The Sumerians, in particular, are credited with the invention of cuneiform, the first written script that allowed them to record everything from laws to trade transactions. The earliest cuneiform tablets, dating back to around 3500 BCE, provide us with some of the first glimpses into the lives of early humans, offering insight into their economy, religion, and governance. Writing, of course, was not just a tool for record keeping. It was a tool for thinking, for planning, and for creating. But it wasn't just the written word that began to flourish in ancient civilizations. Art and architecture, too, were being transformed. The Egyptians, for example, are renowned for their monumental architecture, such as the Great Pyramids of Giza. These pyramids, built as tombs for the pharaohs, were not just feats of engineering. They were expressions of divine power, symbols of the connection between the rulers and the gods. The grandeur of the pyramids was meant to demonstrate the puerile nature of the pharaoh's reign and to secure their place in the afterlife. The Egyptians weren't alone in their pursuit of grandeur. The ancient Greeks, who came centuries later, would go on to revolutionize architecture and art with their emphasis on proportion, symmetry, and balance. The Parthenon, still standing as a testament to ancient Greek creativity, embodies the ideals of beauty and order that would influence Western culture for centuries. It wasn't just about building, it was about building with purpose, with meaning, and with a deep understanding of the human experience. At the same time, the Egyptians, Greeks, and others were developing a deep and rich tradition of philosophy and science. The ancient Greeks, in particular, are famous for their contributions to mathematics, geometry, and astronomy. Figures like Pythagoras, Euclid, and Aristotle set the groundwork for much of modern science, developing theories and concepts that we still use today. But these early philosophers were not only concerned with the physical world, they were also deeply interested in questions of morality, politics, and the nature of existence. These questions would shape not only the future of science, but the future of society itself. One of the most fascinating developments during this time was the creation of the first forms of education. In the ancient world, education was often reserved for the elite kings, priests, and scholars. But as civilizations advanced, education began to trickle down to the broader population. In Sumer, for example, scribes were trained in the art of writing, and schools were established to teach the next generation of record keepers. In Egypt, schools of thought were centered around temples, where priests would educate the young in religious matters, mathematics, and astronomy. Knowledge, once the province of the few, was slowly becoming available to more and more people. This burgeoning knowledge led to advancements in agriculture, engineering, and medicine. The Egyptians developed a deep understanding of medicine, using herbal remedies and surgical procedures that were ahead of their time. They practiced surgery, set broken bones, and even understood the importance of hygiene in preventing disease. Their knowledge of the human body was remarkable, and many of their medical practices were passed down through the ages, influencing later civilizations. Agriculture, too, was transformed. The first empires built large-scale irrigation systems that allowed them to control water sources and cultivate crops more efficiently. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerians built complex canal systems that diverted water from the Tigris and Euphrates rivers to their fields, allowing them to grow crops even in the harshest conditions. These irrigation systems laid the foundation for the great agricultural societies of the ancient world, and their influence can still be seen today in modern farming techniques. One of the most profound changes during this period, however, was the development of trade. As cities grew and empires expanded, the need for goods from distant lands grew as well. The ancient world saw the birth of long-distance trade networks, linking regions that had once been isolated. The Sumerians, for instance, traded with the Indus Valley civilization, exchanging goods like textiles, metals, and pottery. The Phoenicians, known for their maritime skills, developed extensive trade routes across the Mediterranean, spreading goods, ideas, and culture from Egypt to Greece to Rome. The exchange of goods was not just about acquiring wealth, it was about the spread of knowledge, technology, and culture across borders. This expansion of trade also had its darker side. The vast empires of the ancient world required resources, gold, silver, timber, and, of course, people. Slavery became a key component of these ancient economies, as slaves were used to build infrastructure, work the fields, and serve the elite. While slavery existed in many ancient cultures, it became particularly entrenched in the economies of the Greeks and Romans. The existence of slavery was a harsh reality that allowed the grandeur of these ancient civilizations to flourish, but it also marked one of the most troubling aspects of human history. As we move forward in history, we will see how these early achievements in art, science, philosophy, and trade laid the foundation for the rise of even more complex civilizations like the Roman Empire and ancient China. But before we get there, let's pause and appreciate what these first civilizations achieved. They were the builders of the first empires, the creators of art and culture, and the pioneers of knowledge. They set the stage for everything that came after. And now, as we take a deep breath and reflect on the awe-inspiring rise of early human achievements, we'll start to look ahead at the complexities and challenges that faced these early civilizations. In the next chapter, we will explore the rise of empire and the shift from city-states to world-spanning civilizations. as the first civilizations laid the foundations of human culture, knowledge, and governance. The world was already changing in ways that would leave an indelible mark on history. What began as small city-states and scattered empires slowly evolved into massive, world-spanning civilizations, each leaving a unique imprint on the course of human development. From the powerful armies of ancient Egypt to the philosophical explorations of ancient Greece, humanity was on the brink of monumental transformation. But these early civilizations weren't just defined by their conquests and achievements. They were also marked by the social, cultural, and technological revolutions that paved the way for the modern world. The rise of the first world-spanning empires represents the next major shift in the human story. Imagine the grandeur of Rome, with its sprawling streets, magnificent temples, and intricate road networks stretching far beyond the borders of Italy itself. The Romans were known for their military might, but they also understood the power of infrastructure, trade, and governance. Their roads built for the rapid movement of troops and goods also connected distant cities, facilitating the spread of ideas, culture, and technology. The Romans understood something crucial. They weren't just conquering new lands. They were creating a cohesive world in which ideas could flourish, trade could expand, and civilizations could merge. This concept of a vast, interconnected empire was a direct response to the earlier city-states, which had been limited by geography and resources. The Roman Empire, like the Persian Empire before it, sought to consolidate power over massive territories by using a combination of military force, diplomacy, and the development of infrastructure. These empires didn't just control people, they integrated diverse cultures, languages, and religions into a more unified political system. The Pax Romana, a period of relative peace that lasted for more than 2 centuries, is a testament to the success of this imperial vision. At the same time, the rise of the ancient Chinese civilization was unfolding on the other side of the world. In China, the development of the Qin and Han dynasties marked a shift from feudalism to a centralized, bureaucratic state that sought to unify the vast and varied territories of China. The Great Wall of China, which stretches across thousands of miles, was both a symbol of the strength of the Chinese Empire and a practical defense against invaders. The Chinese, like the Romans, understood the power of infrastructure roads, canals, and communication systems that allowed them to maintain control over their vast empire. While these early empires were powerful, they were also built upon a foundation of knowledge and innovation that went far beyond mere conquest. In the Roman Empire, for instance, the development of aqueducts and advanced engineering techniques allowed for the construction of cities with running water, complex sewer systems, and public baths. These technological advancements were not just a testament to Roman ingenuity, they were also critical to the functioning of the empire itself, improving the quality of life for citizens and making cities more livable. In China, the invention of paper, gunpowder, and the compass during the Han Dynasty laid the groundwork for future technological revolutions. The Chinese also developed sophisticated systems of governance and trade, creating an empire that was not only powerful militarily, but also a hub for intellectual, cultural, and economic exchange. The Silk Road, which connected China with the Mediterranean, was a key trade route that allowed goods, ideas, and technologies to flow across vast distances, helping to create a truly global network of commerce and culture. As these empires expanded, so did the complexity of their societies. With larger territories came more diverse populations, and with that diversity came the need for more sophisticated systems of governance, law, and social order. The ancient empires were not just political entities, they were massive social experiments, attempting to integrate different peoples, languages, and cultures into a single, cohesive society. But as the empires grew, so did their internal struggles. The tensions between different cultures, religions, and social classes began to mount, and the massive bureaucracies that held these empires together began to show cracks. Historians still argue whether the fall of these early empires was inevitable, or whether they were brought down by internal decay, external pressures, or a combination of both. In the case of the Roman Empire, the division between the western and eastern halves of the empire, the rise of barbarian invasions, and economic instability contributed to its eventual decline. Similarly, the Chinese empires faced internal revolts, invasions, and the challenge of maintaining unity in a vast, diverse territory. The end of these empires didn't mark the end of civilization, it marked a transition, one that would pave the way for new political systems, ideas, and cultural renaissances in the centuries to come. But for now, let's focus on the rise of new ideas, particularly in the realms of philosophy, religion, and the arts. In both Rome and China, we see the development of schools of thought that would shape the course of human history. In Greece, the influence of thinkers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle laid the foundation for Western philosophy. With their ideas on ethics, politics, and metaphysics still influencing thought today. Meanwhile, in China, Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism provided philosophical and spiritual frameworks for understanding the world, and these traditions would go on to shape Chinese culture for centuries. One of the most profound cultural shifts during this period was the spread of religion. In the Roman Empire, the rise of Christianity transformed not just the empire, but the entire course of Western history. Christianity, with its message of peace, salvation, and eternal life, spread rapidly throughout the Roman world, eventually becoming the empire's state religion. The rise of Christianity marked a profound shift in the way people viewed the world and their place in it, and its influence continues to this day. In China, Buddhism spread from India and was embraced by the ruling classes, eventually influencing the development of Chinese thought and culture. Buddhism, with its teachings on suffering, enlightenment, and the impermanence of life, offered a radically different way of understanding the human experience. The spread of Buddhism in China also led to the development of a unique synthesis of Buddhist, Taoist, and Confucian ideas, which became central to Chinese culture. As we look at the rise of empires, philosophies, and religions during this period, we begin to understand just how interconnected the ancient world was. The Silk Road, the Roman roads, and the spread of ideas all contributed to the creation of a world that was, in many ways, far more connected than we often realize. These early empires and their cultural achievements set the stage for the next phase of human history, one that would see the rise of new nations, new ideologies, and new forms of governance. In the next chapter, we will explore how these empires eventually gave way to new political and social structures. The rise of medieval societies, the spread of Islam, the development of feudalism, and the creation of new kingdoms will show us the continued evolution of human civilization and the complex web of forces that have shaped our modern world. As the great empires of the ancient world began to crumble, new powers rose to take their place. This shift in power wasn't just about the collapse of empires. It was a transformation in the way societies were organized, the way power was distributed, and the way people interacted with the world around them. The fall of the Roman Empire, the decline of Han China, and the disintegration of other ancient powers created a power vacuum. This allowed for the emergence of entirely new political systems, new religions, and new ways of thinking that would shape the world for centuries to come. In the aftermath of Rome's fall, Europe entered what we now call the Middle Ages, a period marked by the rise of feudalism. Picture yourself in a small medieval village, surrounded by stone walls and fields of crops. The once great Roman roads are in disrepair, and the cities are no longer the bustling hubs of trade they once were. Instead, you see a world where land and power are everything. Kings, lords, and knights control large estates, and peasants work the land in exchange for protection. This was a world of clear hierarchies. Those who owned land held power, and those who didn't were at the mercy of those in charge. Feudalism was born out of necessity. After the fall of centralized Roman authority, Europe needed a new system to organize society and ensure protection in a time of frequent invasions and unrest. The feudal system provided just that: local rulers could control small territories, defend them, and manage the agricultural economy, while peasants could work the land and receive protection in return. This decentralized structure replaced the vast bureaucratic empires of the past, and though it often led to a fragmented and isolated world, it allowed local communities to survive and thrive in an era of uncertainty. At the same time, Europe was also beginning to experience the rise of Christianity as a unifying force. With the fall of the Roman Empire came the spread of Christianity, which would eventually become the dominant religion in Europe. The conversion of Emperor Constantine to Christianity in the 4th century CE marked a major turning point. Christianity became not only a spiritual force, but a political one as well, with the Church and its leaders wielding significant power over both the kings and the people. The Catholic Church became the center of religious and social life for much of medieval Europe, shaping everything from education to laws, to the very way people understood the world around them. But Christianity wasn't the only force shaping the world. In the East, the rise of Islam was changing the face of the Middle East, North Africa, and beyond. In the early 7th century, the Prophet Muhammad established the foundations of Islam, a religion that would quickly spread across the Arabian Peninsula, and then to large parts of the world. The spread of Islam was not just a religious phenomenon, it was also a political one. The rise of the Islamic caliphates, especially the Umayyad and Abbasid dynasties, marked the beginning of a new empire-building era. Like the Roman Empire before it, the Islamic world created a vast empire that spanned across regions and connected diverse peoples, cultures, and ideas. Imagine yourself in the bustling city of Baghdad during the height of the Abbasid Caliphate. The streets are filled with scholars, merchants, and travelers from all over the known world. Libraries and schools are abuzz with the latest philosophical and scientific debates, and the sound of Arabic poetry fills the air. The Islamic Golden Age was a time of incredible cultural and intellectual flourishing, with advances in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy that would lay the foundation for much of modern science. The Islamic world became the center of knowledge and learning, preserving the works of ancient Greece and Rome, while also making groundbreaking contributions of its own. Islamic scholars translated the works of Aristotle, Galen, and other ancient thinkers into Arabic, preserving these texts for future generations. They made groundbreaking advancements in mathematics, introducing the concept of algebra and developing advanced methods for solving equations. They made significant contributions to medicine, developing surgical techniques and introducing the concept of quarantine to control the spread of disease. In astronomy, they mapped the stars with unprecedented accuracy, laying the groundwork for later European explorations of the cosmos. But while the Islamic world flourished, Europe remained largely isolated and fragmented. It wasn't until the later Middle Ages, around the 12th and 13th centuries, that Europe began to experience its own intellectual revival. This period, known as the Renaissance, marked the beginning of Europe's slow return to learning and innovation. The rediscovery of ancient Greek and Roman texts, coupled with the influx of knowledge from the Islamic world, sparked a cultural and intellectual awakening. Scholars in Europe began to question long-held beliefs, challenging the Church's teachings and seeking new ways of thinking about science, philosophy, and the natural world. As Europe emerged from the intellectual darkness of the early Middle Ages, the seeds of modern science, art, and thought were planted. The Renaissance saw the rise of great artists like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael, whose works would forever change the course of art history. It was also during this time that thinkers like Galileo, Copernicus, and Kepler began to challenge the geocentric view of the universe, paving the way for the scientific revolution. At the same time, the rise of powerful kingdoms and nation-states in Europe began to challenge the old feudal order. The consolidation of power under monarchs like Charlemagne, William the Conqueror, and later figures like King Henry VIII and Queen Elizabeth I signaled the end of feudalism and the beginning of a new political landscape. The Church, once the central authority in Europe, began to lose its grip on power as monarchs asserted their authority. The Protestant Reformation, led by figures like Martin Luther, further eroded the power of the Catholic Church, splitting Europe into religious factions and setting the stage for centuries of conflict. Meanwhile, the world beyond Europe was also undergoing dramatic changes. The age of exploration, beginning in the 15th century, brought Europeans into contact with distant lands. Explorers like Christopher Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and Ferdinand Magellan opened up new trade routes and introduced new goods, ideas, and cultures to Europe. This period of exploration would lead to the establishment of vast colonial empires, which would have a profound impact on the world. As we look at these shifts in power and thought, we begin to see how the medieval world paved the way for the modern age. The rise of empires, the spread of religions, the development of new intellectual movements, and the expansion of trade all laid the groundwork for the complex, interconnected world we live in today. In the next chapter, we'll explore the lasting legacies of these civilizations, the achievements, the struggles, and the lessons they left behind.
As the world entered the Renaissance and the age of exploration, the foundations of modernity began to take shape. These periods marked a departure from the centuries of feudalism and medieval structures, ushering in a new era characterized by exploration, the questioning of old systems, and the rise of individualism. But the legacies of the earlier civilizations, the ancient Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, and the great empires of China and the Islamic Caliphate still held significant influence. The world was about to undergo dramatic shifts in both thought and power, and the echoes of past achievements would reverberate throughout the future. Let's start by imagining the world of the 16th century. In Europe, the Renaissance had given rise to a renewed interest in the classical past Greek and Roman art, philosophy, and science. Think of yourself walking through the streets of Florence or Rome, where towering marble statues and awe-inspiring paintings cover the walls of churches and palaces. The air is filled with intellectual fervor, as scholars and artists are eager to return to the great works of ancient philosophers and scientists, as well as to create their own. It's a world where humanism, the belief in the potential of human beings, is taking center stage. In the middle of all this, you find figures like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael, whose work would forever change art and science. Da Vinci wasn't just painting masterpieces like The Last Supper and Mona Lisa. He was also a scientist, an engineer, and an inventor. His sketches for flying machines, anatomical studies, and architectural designs show the vast reach of Renaissance creativity, fusing art with science in ways that had never been done before. Meanwhile, Michelangelo's frescoes on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel pushed the boundaries of what art could express, blending the divine with the human form in a breathtaking display of emotion and skill. But the Renaissance wasn't just about art, it was also about questioning and challenging existing systems of knowledge. Philosophers like Niccolò Machiavelli began to explore the nature of power and governance, while scientists like Copernicus and Galileo challenged the long-held belief that the Earth was the center of the universe. Copernicus' theory that the sun, not the Earth, was at the center of the universe would eventually revolutionize the field of astronomy. Galileo, with his telescope, provided evidence that supported this theory, which set the stage for the scientific revolution that would follow. These early challenges to the status quo laid the groundwork for modern science, which relies on observation, experimentation, and the willingness to question long-held beliefs. At the same time, the Protestant Reformation, led by figures like Martin Luther and John Calvin, was shaking the foundations of the Catholic Church's authority. Luther's 95 Theses, nailed to the door of a church in Wittenberg in 1517, criticized the Church's practices and called for reform. His ideas spread rapidly, challenging not just religious practices but also political power. The Reformation divided Europe, creating a rift between Catholic and Protestant states that would lead to decades of conflict. The rise of Protestantism also paved the way for the development of new forms of Christianity, which in turn would influence the social, political, and religious landscape of the future. Across the ocean, the age of exploration was opening up new frontiers. The Portuguese and Spanish began to sail the seas, looking for trade routes to Asia, while Christopher Columbus' famous 1492 voyage opened up the Americas to European colonization. The discovery of the New World fundamentally changed the course of history. Imagine yourself standing on the shores of the Caribbean, gazing at the vast new lands that Europeans would begin to settle and exploit. The riches of the Americas' gold, silver, and crops would fuel European economies and create a new global exchange. However, this new world also brought profound consequences, including the enslavement and decimation of indigenous populations. The spread of European diseases, and the establishment of colonial empires that would last for centuries. As Europeans expanded into the Americas, they brought with them not only goods and people, but also ideas, technologies, and cultures. The Columbian Exchange, as it is called, led to the movement of plants, animals, and even diseases between the Old World and the New. Foods like potatoes, tomatoes, and corn were introduced to Europe, while livestock and grains were brought to the Americas. This exchange dramatically altered the global landscape, making the world more interconnected than ever before. The Age of Exploration also sparked a period of intense global trade. European powers established vast colonial empires that spanned the globe, from the Spanish and Portuguese in the Americas to the Dutch and British in Asia and Africa. This period saw the rise of mercantilism, the belief that a country's wealth was determined by its stock of precious metals and its ability to export more than it imported. This economic philosophy drove European countries to establish trade monopolies, form powerful trading companies, and wage wars to protect their economic interests. As the global economy expanded, so did the power of the merchant class. Trade, once limited to local markets, now spanned continents, creating new opportunities for wealth and social mobility. The growth of cities and the rise of a new class of wealthy merchants laid the groundwork for the Industrial Revolution, which would completely transform the world in the centuries to come. But even as the world became more interconnected, deep inequalities persisted. The exploitation of indigenous peoples in the Americas, the transatlantic slave trade, and the labor of enslaved Africans in European colonies highlighted the darker side of global trade and exploration. These injustices laid the foundation for struggles over human rights and freedom that would continue for centuries, culminating in movements for abolition, civil rights, and independence across the world. As we look back at the transformation of the world during the Renaissance and the Age of Exploration, we begin to see the early foundations of the modern world taking shape. The ideas of humanism, individualism, and scientific inquiry would shape the next several centuries, leading to the Enlightenment and the eventual birth of modern democracy, technology, and industry. Meanwhile, the rise of global trade and the expansion of European empires would set the stage for the struggles and conflicts that would shape the 19th and 20th centuries. In the next chapter, we will explore how these ideas and events laid the groundwork for the rise of the modern world, focusing on the developments that would change the course of history forever, including the Industrial Revolution, the rise of capitalism, and the birth of the modern nation.
As we transition from the Age of Exploration into the Industrial Revolution and the rise of modernity, the world is on the cusp of dramatic transformation. This period marks a shift from traditional agrarian societies to industrialized, urbanized ones where new technologies, economic systems, and social structures will fundamentally change the course of human history. In just a few centuries, human civilization will evolve from farming villages and small trading outposts into massive cities teeming with machines, factories, and bustling industries. Imagine yourself stepping into the heart of an industrial city. In the 18th century, perhaps London, Manchester, or even one of the rapidly growing cities in the United States. The streets are filled with smoke from coal-burning factories, the air thick with the sound of machines' worry, steam engines puffing, and the clatter of iron being shaped into tools and machinery. The city is alive with the hustle of people coming from rural areas, eager to find work and take part in this new, fast-paced world of production. The old agrarian way of life is quickly being replaced with a mechanized system of industry and commerce, one that will create immense wealth but also vast inequalities. The Industrial Revolution. which began in Britain in the late 18th century, was powered by innovations in technology and energy. The steam engine, perfected by James Watt, became the cornerstone of industrialization. With it, factories could now operate on a scale that was previously unimaginable, producing goods faster and more efficiently than ever before. This technological breakthrough led to the creation of trains, ships, and machines that could move goods and people across vast distances. The world was no longer limited by slow transportation or manual labor. It was propelled by the power of steam and later electricity, and, as we'll see, by the ingenuity of countless inventors and entrepreneurs. Historians still argue about the exact causes of the Industrial Revolution, but it's clear that it was not just a technological shift, it was also a cultural one. The rise of capitalism, particularly in Europe and later in the United States, played a crucial role in this transformation. The capitalist system encouraged innovation, investment, and competition, all of which spurred rapid technological advancements. In this new system, wealth could be created through manufacturing, trade, and investment, and the world's economies became increasingly tied to industrial output. But the Industrial Revolution wasn't without its downsides. The rapid urbanization that accompanied industrialization led to the growth of overcrowded cities, where workers lived in cramped, unsanitary conditions. Child labor became widespread, as families were often forced to send their children into factories to help make ends meet. The gap between the rich and the poor grew wider, as factory owners and entrepreneurs accumulated vast fortunes while the working class endured harsh conditions for little pay. This rise of inequality led to growing discontent, which would eventually fuel movements for workers' rights, labor reforms, and the rise of socialism and communism. At the same time, the Industrial Revolution brought with it unprecedented progress. New industries such as textiles, steel, and coal mining exploded, while innovations in communication and transportation made the world smaller and more interconnected. The telegraph, invented by Samuel Morse, allowed people to send messages across long distances almost instantly. The railroad connected cities and countries in ways that had never been possible before, and soon electricity would begin to light up cities, factories, and homes, changing the way people lived and worked. But the technological advancements weren't confined to factories and cities. They also impacted agriculture. With the advent of the mechanical reaper, steam-powered plows, and fertilizers, farming became more efficient, allowing for higher yields and feeding more people. This meant that fewer people needed to work the land, which in turn allowed for the growth of urban populations and the creation of a working class that would power the machines of the Industrial Revolution. As the industrial age progressed, the effects of these changes began to reach beyond the factory floors and city streets. The rise of industrialization also led to the creation of a new social order. The traditional aristocracy, whose wealth had been tied to land and agriculture, began to lose its influence. The new wealth was in factories, railroads, and mines, and this wealth was largely concentrated in the hands of industrialists, bankers, and entrepreneurs. At the same time, the working class, which had once been tied to agriculture, was now dependent on wages earned in factories. This shift in social structures led to new forms of social mobility, but it also created new tensions. Between the classes, the rise of the middle class also marked a significant change in society. The middle class, the entrepreneurs, small business owners, and professionals became the driving force behind economic growth and technological innovation. The values of hard work, individualism, and success that defined the middle class became central to the social and cultural landscape of the modern world. At the same time, the rise of the middle class also brought with it a growing emphasis on education, with new schools and universities popping up to train the next generation of leaders, scientists, and workers. As the world entered the 19th century, these changes began to accelerate. New scientific discoveries, such as Darwin's theory of evolution and the development of new medical treatments, shook established worldviews and laid the groundwork for the next wave of social and intellectual movements. The emergence of new political ideologies, like liberalism, conservatism, and socialism, reflected the growing dissatisfaction with the status quo and the desire for change. The industrial age was a time of great innovation, but it was also a time of deep struggle and conflict. With the expansion of industrialization came the rise of imperialism. European powers, driven by their need for raw materials and new markets, began to colonize vast parts of Asia, Africa, and the Americas. This imperialist drive was fueled by the belief in the superiority of Western civilization and the desire to spread European values and systems around the world. But imperialism had its costs. The exploitation of native populations, the extraction of resources, and the disruption of local economies led to long-lasting consequences, some of which are still felt today as we look at the world that emerged. From the Industrial Revolution, we see the birth of the modern world in many ways. The industrialization of agriculture, the rise of new political ideologies, the rapid expansion of cities, and the creation of global trade networks all laid the foundation for the world we live in today. But this world was not without its challenges, and the tensions created by these changes would soon lead to massive social upheaval, including the revolutions of 1848, the rise of labor movements, and eventually, the world wars that would forever alter the global order. As we move into the next chapter, we'll explore how the Industrial Revolution set the stage for the modern political and economic world. With the rise of capitalism, the growth of global markets, and the expansion of imperial power, this period marked the beginning of the modern age, one that would see both the triumphs and tragedies that define our present world.